Even though the Colts starters will not participate this weekend, we still have some Indianapolis Colts football to cover. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Hello, everyone. I am Zach Hicks, your favorite film nerd over at horseshoehuddle.com. My better half, Jake Arthur, is not here today. He will be back tomorrow night after the Colts preseason game against the Arizona Cardinals. For those of you who do not know, the Colts play the Cardinals tomorrow night, 7 p.m. I'm not sure which station that's on, but 7 p.m. is where the Colts are playing the Cardinals. We will be live streaming after that game to cover everything that happens. So tune in at like 1 a.m. if you guys are up at that time to catch all of the post-game action. But guys, Colts Cardinals, the starters are not playing in this one, so we don't have the big money clicks, the clicks drivers and stuff like that of Anthony Richardson playing in this game. But we do have some players to talk about and some players in some really interesting roster battles to really discuss going into this game. So this will be our Arizona Cardinals preview episode today, but again, it's going to be a little bit of a condensed episode because we don't really have the Richardsons and the AD Mitchells, Leatu Latus to really talk about. We're going to be talking more about the bottom of the roster guys, which you guys know that's my specialty. But I understand how it is for a lot of people. But don't worry, we're going to make it fun. We're going to make it fun. Let's start with the biggest storylines heading into this second preseason game, and these are some storylines concerning some guys who. I'm not saying that these guys are going to get cut or they're in jeopardy, but guys who just kind of either need a bounce back game or need a big game or just big storylines heading into this one. And I think the biggest overall one is tight end Jelani Woods. Now, this is a player who's a former top 100 pick, a player the Colts have had a lot of faith in over the years, a guy that they took back in 2022 and had high expectations for, had a really promising rookie season, not a great rookie season by any means, but there were some really promising flashes in that disastrous, 2022 season from him. And there was a lot of hype going into what he was going to be last year before that unfortunate hamstring injury in camp that held him out for the entirety of that 2023 season. So he's coming back into camp this year, still a fairly young tight end. I think he's 25 years old, so still fairly young. And the Colts had some expectations that maybe he could move up the roster and supplant to Kylan Granson as the receiving tight end at the top of the roster. Maybe he could surpass Will Mallory and be that tight end 3 or 4, who is also a wide receiver type tight end that can make some plays in the passing game. But at this point in training camp, it feels to me like Jelani Woods is tight end 5 on the roster. Now, keeping 5 tight ends is a little difficult for an NFL team to really maneuver around. Now, last year they were able to technically go into the regular season with 5 tight ends on the roster, but to make that happen, they only had 3 wide receivers initially, and then they made the corresponding moves to put Jelani Woods on IR and bring in Isaiah McKenzie back off the practice squad. So, they were able to make some maneuvers to make that work there, but it's not a thing that a team typically does. And we saw in this past preseason game, the 3 starting tight ends on this team are probably Drew Ogletree, Kylan Granson, and Mo Alley-Cox. I don't expect to see any of those guys play this weekend because the Colts view all 3 of them as part-time starters. Those are the 3 guys they trust the most in this tight end room. And then it really comes down to Mallory and Woods for that final tight end spot if they're going to keep 4. And while Woods has the pedigree of being a higher draft pick, Mallory had a really good rookie season last year and has done a lot of good things in the passing game. So I'm not sure what's going to happen with this tight end room. Obviously, the ideal situation would have been releasing Mo Alley-Cox, the older tight end in the room, keeping all these young kids and seeing what they could do. But it looks like the team feels pretty confident in what Mo Alley-Cox brings as a blocker and just as overall versatility and reliability on the field. I'm not saying that for my sense. I'm saying that for the team's sense. I know how some of you guys are going to feel about that there. So Jelani Woods is a really interesting, perspective to see where he fits on this roster. I mean, he was playing into the late 3rd quarter in the first preseason game where, again, guys like Ogletree and Granson and Alley-Cox were out of the game by the halfway point of the first quarter. And then when it came to, I think Mallory was still out there with Woods as well, but I think Mallory might have come out a little bit earlier as well. So yeah, it's tough, man. I want to add a little bit of context here too. I mean, Stephen Holder, who covers Indianapolis Colts for ESPN, he made a tweet today when I'm recording this here on Friday saying, I'm not making any predictions for now on what happens with Jelani Woods, but as I mentioned in the story, which is the story that he wrote, you guys can check that out over on ESPN, he has been thoroughly underwhelming in this camp. It's been very disappointing given the high hopes. We'll see what happens. He's still very young. And that's the thing, like he's still a young player, and we could see the Colts not want to give up on him, but he really needs to make some waves in these next 2 preseason games to avoid being on that roster bubble. So I'm not going to make a prediction and say Jelani Woods is certainly going to get cut or anything, because it is difficult to give up on that athletic profile and the draft pedigree of being a top 100 pick just 2 years ago. But at this point, like, it feels like this coaching staff has 3, maybe 4 guys above him on the roster. And for a position group that typically only keeps 3 to 4, it's difficult to see that path for him making the team. So we'll see what he can do on Saturday. He's going to get a bunch of chances to really showcase his development as a blocker and as a pass catcher. And he needs to make things happen if he wants to make this team or have a role this year with the Indianapolis Colts. 2 players who were underwhelming, to say the least, in the Colts' first preseason game last week against the Denver Broncos, left tackle Blake Freeland and cornerback Dallas Flowers. I'm really curious to see how those guys bounce back this weekend and if those concerns can kind of be mitigated a little bit that we saw in week 1. I think for Freeland, it just looked a lot like his rookie season, where big, imposing body type and a great athlete, but when he encounters contact and when the pass rushers are getting close, you see the feet freeze up too much. You see him drop his head too much. You see the struggles with his anchor and his strength. And, you know, I think my guy Colts Film Room said it really well on Twitter the other day. It's like a guy who's just like a quick diet away from being a tight end trying to play left tackle. And you can kind of see it in how he plays with his strength and overall anchor out there. So we'll see if he can bounce back. Hopefully he can bounce back, because he's still a 4th round pick from a year ago who, you know, he got better as the year went along last year, but it just wasn't a great rookie season for a guy who played as much as he did. And now he's got some in-house competition in Matt Gonsalves, who has a good chance to win that swing tackle spot. So Freeland, I'm not saying he's on the roster bubble. Like, I think he's going to be safe, but he really needs to bounce back. Dallas Flowers, a guy who we thought was going to compete for starting snaps on the outside. That competition really hasn't happened. He was thoroughly picked on against the Denver Broncos, but if he wants to solidify himself as that 3rd outside corner this year, he really needs to have a bounce back game, because Darrell Baker Jr. has had a pretty good camp. And Darrell Baker Jr. is a guy who this coaching staff really likes. So if Darrell Baker Jr. continues to do some good things, Flowers might find himself as cornerback 4 or 5 when it comes to that outside rotation, and kind of out of the rotation completely come regular season time. Another player who I do think is on the roster bubble, and that is safety Rodney Thomas, a guy 2 years ago, 7th round pick who had a fantastic rookie season. We were all really excited about his potential in the league. It all came crashing back downhill last year, and it just wasn't that great a year. He missed a lot of tackles. He just did not look at home at free safety. And by the time the season came to a close, he was essentially benched for a guy who was moved from linebacker to safety midseason. You know, Ronnie Harrison essentially took his job in those final 2 games, even with Julian Blackmon out due to an injury. And we haven't really heard too much about Rodney Thomas here in camp either. So for Thomas to make the team, he really needs to have a great preseason here. He needs to have, you know, 2 games in these last 2 games that really stand out and show that he still has that potential to be a starter in the NFL or be a guy who can play NFL football. I don't know if he's going to do that, because it's just difficult to make those plays as safety in the preseason. But Thomas, man, this is now or never for Rodney Thomas. He needs to get out here and show that he can be a player worth keeping on the roster, or the Colts are just going to have to reset with that depth behind him. And then one more player I want to discuss here. I don't think this player is on the roster bubble at all, but I think when it comes to biggest stories, we do have to mention him. Slinging Sammy Ehlinger, a guy going out there for his 4th preseason with the Colts. We love Sammy Ehlinger. He's been having a really good preseason, obviously, this year and every year with the Colts. And I'm excited to see him out there on Saturday. So I'd expect that he gets the whole first half, and then it'll be Slovis gets the third quarter, Jason Bean gets the fourth quarter. I'm assuming that's how the Colts are going to do it. So all you guys that are big Sam Ehlinger fans, this is going to be a great weekend for all of you, including myself. So those are the guys that you really want to keep an eye on for being like on the roster bubble or just need to have bounce back games or big games. And then obviously Sam Ehlinger leading the way in this one in terms of just feeding players and making them look good out there. Bet the over in this game, obviously, with Sam Ehlinger back there at quarterback. But coming up, guys, we're going to transition to bottom of the roster guys who could impress or guys that showed out in preseason game one and need to carry that momentum into this one if they want to turn their outside shot to make the roster into a full-fledged roster position this offseason. But first, Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. Look, guys, I'm a huge Washington Nationals fan, and while this season really hasn't been my favorite season watching the team, places like Gametime make it easy for me to get out there and watch my Nationals. I just love getting out there whenever I have a chance to go watch my Nationals lose a close one and get more excited about the future. I mean, look, James Wood is up. He's swinging the bat really well, so I can't complain too much right now, I guess. But with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. You get last-minute deals, save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concert, comedy, theater, and everything near you. You get flash deals, which means you can save even more exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. You guys get all-in prices, and you can toggle that feature, and it shows that total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. And you get views from your seat, that panoramic view from your seat before you buy, which is great. Shows, there's nothing in your way, and you can really see the stadium and see the field out there. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. And thank you guys for making Locked On Colts your first listen today and every day. And for your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insight into the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, guys, we're transitioning to talk about bottom of the roster guys or just young players who have had a good offseason so far, but need that one more little jump there if they either want to make it to the roster or maybe just secure a practice squad spot here in the final days of training camp and of the offseason in general. The first two players I want to mention, and I don't think either of these two players are, in jeopardy of not being on the team, but they're players certainly to mention here because they had strong first games. And that is Adetomi Adebawore and Isaiah Land, pass rushers, obviously up there in the trenches. Adetomi, I thought, was fantastic against the Denver Broncos in week one of the preseason. I think Jake mentioned a couple times on the podcast this offseason about Adetomi looking really good in one-on-ones and pass rush drills and just doing everything he could this offseason to take that next step. And I think if he continues to showcase this power that he's showing, this ability to disengage up in the trenches, I think he can earn himself a spot in the pass rush rotation rather than being just that guy who is a healthy scratch every weekend. I think another important thing with Adetomi too is I think he was 6th on the team in week one of the preseason in terms of special team snaps. He did a ton of work on the kick teams, the kick coverage teams, the blocking for the kick teams. And while he didn't record many stats or do anything fantastic, just the ability to showcase that he can be out there on those special teams units goes a long way to making a roster and being active on game days. So Adetomi is doing everything behind the scenes to be active on game days. And then he's also showcasing the ability to rush the passer, which will get him some snaps on defense as well. So Adetomi Adebawore, love what we're seeing from him this offseason. Hopefully he can continue that this weekend and have another great game. Isaiah Land, I'm really intrigued by the potential with his ability in run defense, with his natural pop in his hands, his finesse off the edge. I really, really like him as a developmental pass rusher. And with Samson Ebukam going down for the year, the Colts opened up that roster spot at the bottom of the roster for a developmental edge to continue to work with, obviously, throughout the regular season. So I think Isaiah Land should be that guy who makes the team, and the Colts continue to work with him because there's certainly something there. And I hope that he can show out yet again this preseason game, because he had a couple pressures late against the Denver Broncos, which I was really excited about. So Isaiah Land, I think he's going to be another guy where we see some really good things this weekend. Two more quarterbacks. Obviously, look, we mentioned Sam Ehlinger in the first one. Sam Ehlinger is going to get a lot of the snaps in this. He's going to make our receivers and tight ends look really good on offense. But Jason Bean and Keaton Slovis, I think those guys are kind of competing to see not only if they can maybe supplant Sam Ehlinger as QB3. I don't think that's going to happen, but maybe. Like, there's an outside chance. But I think both these guys are really working to see who's going to be the practice squad developmental quarterback for the Colts this next season. Who's going to be that guy that can keep around the system, keep in the roster, just system in general, and maybe be a guy that they can call up if an injury happens, or a guy they trust enough to work with for years, because this will likely be Sam Ehlinger's last season with the team as his contract expires. So, Jason Bean, Keaton Slovis, I think we saw some good things from them in that week 1 preseason game. I think in the little bits that we've seen in training camp, it's been pretty positive. I think Greg Doyle for Indy Star wrote an article about how with Jason Bean, the Colts expected to move him to wide receiver at this point in camp, but he's been impressive enough at quarterback to where they've kept him at the quarterback position. So Jason Bean, Keaton Slovis, I'm excited to see what those guys can do. You guys know how I am with Jason Bean. I want to see as much Jason Bean as possible out there, and I'm really excited to see some more from him, obviously, this weekend. Another undrafted free agent, though, that I want to mention, and this is actually a guy who, by the time you guys are listening to this, I would have posted an article for horseshoehuddle.com about him, but undrafted free agent Dalton Tucker has been working with the second-team offensive line all training camp. He's the natural backup to Will Fries at this point, and I think he's a really interesting guy to keep an eye on, because, the Colts had that 22-year streak of an undrafted free agent making the opening day roster. 22 years in a row. I think Hale Henchis or whatever was like the last guy to do it, or maybe it was a kicker. I think it was Rodrigo Blankenship was actually the last guy in that streak. But the Colts have kind of gotten away from it the last couple of years. I mean, if you even look at their undrafted free agent class this year, of the 7 guys they signed after the draft, only 5 of them still remain on the roster. And Dalton Tucker, to me, is the guy who has the best chance at making it. Second-team right guard right now, similar size and athletic profile to Will Fries, very explosive, 6'6", 307 pounds, really long arms, so good length as well. And he had a really good preseason day 1. I mean, his first game of the preseason, he had 26 pass blocking snaps, only allowed 1 pressure in that game, had some decent snaps in the run game as well. So I don't think Dalton Tucker is a favorite to make the roster at this point, but for my money, I would keep him over Josh Sills as that 10th offensive lineman, or that final interior offensive lineman to back up Will Fries. I think he's shown enough so far to where I'd keep him, but we'll see what the Colts do with him there. I'm excited to see if he can, earn a roster spot. That'd be great to start a new undrafted free agent streak here for the Indianapolis Colts. Another player to watch, DJ Montgomery, with Ashton Doolin missing some time these last couple weeks of practice. DJ Montgomery's been getting a lot of reps with the 1s and the 2s, and he's been really showing out. Preseason game 1, he had a couple really big catches. I know he had a bad drop towards the end, but a couple really big catches in that game as well. And he's a player where, again, if Ashton Doolin's not healthy to start the season, DJ Montgomery could easily be wide receiver 6 for this team. They really, really like him. So I'm expecting to see some really big things with him and Ehlinger in that first half on Saturday. And then a couple other players here who I think one of these guys is probably not making the team, but maybe can be a practice squad guy, and that's Craig Young, undrafted free agent out of Kansas. Did some really good things in coverage in week 1 that I really liked. And then the 2 drafted cornerbacks, Jalen Simpson and Micah Abraham. Abraham obviously had the big flashy touchdown last week on the fumble recovery. Really big things from him. Jalen Simpson, I think, was a little more up and down. But those guys are competing for roster spots right now. Abraham has to surpass Chris Lamons in the slot. And then a guy like Jalen Simpson has to pass either Dallas Flowers or Darrell Baker Jr., who have had, at least Baker Jr. has had a pretty good camp. So we'll see if those guys can make their way on the roster as well. Big thing will be special teams with those guys. Hopefully they can get out there and give some special team snaps, but they'll get their chance this weekend. This is what this game is for. It's for these type of guys I just mentioned, the Dalton Tuckers, the DJ Montgomerys, the Jalen Simpsons, the Micah Abrahams. They're going to get a majority of this game. And if they can make some plays, they can showcase that, hey, we deserve to be on this roster more so than these late 20-year-olds, like early 30-year-old vets that you're keeping ahead of us. So big weeks for all of these guys here to see if they can either make the roster or make their way to the practice squad at the very least, especially with those quarterbacks I mentioned earlier. But to finally close out this pregame episode, we got tons of questions from you guys. It was like 70 questions from you guys on Twitter when we asked the other day. So I'm going to run through a couple of the questions that we missed and really close things out before we get to this game on Saturday. But first, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tool to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn it isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to that perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Look, guys, I've been on both sides of the hiring process. LinkedIn is obviously the best place to go about all of that there. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Locked On Colts Everydayers, we're back with some of your burning questions heading into this second preseason game. And some of these obviously pertain to the preseason game and others pertain to just this Colts team in general. First one here from Ethan O-Ring. I hope I said your last name correctly there, Ethan. He asked, with Samson Ebukam out for the year, who's most likely to lead the defensive line in pressures or in sacks? I actually have a weird one for this, and I'm going to say the leader in sacks this year is none other than Kwity Paye. And I'm not saying that he's going to lead the team in pressures. I think it's either going to be Laiatu Latu or DeForest Buckner that leads the team in pressure. So hear me out for my reasoning here. The big thing with how the Colts defensive line rushes the passer is your Leo, which is Laiatu Latu. He's going to be in that wide 9, 24/7, crashing downhill. And while, yes, he obviously is going to be asked to contain on his rushes and keep quarterbacks in the pocket, he's more so trying to bend the edge, get around the corner, and create that disruption and that havoc in the pocket. And same with DeForest Buckner on the interior. You're going to get the swim moves, you're going to get that disruptive force from the interior. But with Kwity Paye on the backside, what they ask that backside defensive end to do is really get upfield with a strong bull rush, maintain pocket integrity, and then disengage if you have to and create pressure or create havoc that way. Now, there's obviously times where they just let him go to work and unleash him, but for the most part, it's a lot of contained rushes from that backside defensive end. So when I'm thinking about how this season's going to look with rushing the passer, I think you're going to have very productive rushes from Laiatu Latu that causes quarterbacks to move to their right. You're going to get productive rushes from DeForest Buckner, which causes quarterbacks to move to their right. And then you're going to get Kwity Paye, who gets to that right position, which is a couple yards back in the pocket, holding off his right tackle. And then he's going to have a quarterback run right into his arms because Laiatu Latu is creating pressure and DeForest Buckner is taking away that escape lane stepping forward. So I think Kwity Paye could realistically get up to like 10 to 12 sacks this year, and maybe only 3 or 4 of them are ones that he created for himself. I think he could realistically lead this team in sacks purely because Laiatu Latu and DeForest Buckner run quarterbacks into him. We saw that with Dio Dangbo last year, had quite a few sacks last season where quarterbacks were run into him. Same with Kwity Paye, obviously, with Ebukam doing his work on the other side. So yeah, I think Kwity Paye has a chance to get to like 10 to 12 purely from quarterbacks running into him, which, look, at the end of the day, a sack is a sack. I will take it. I don't care who gets it. Get that quarterback on the ground, and I think Kwity Paye could end up leading it. That's going to be my weird prediction for that there. You guys can let me know in the comment section what you think. Another question that Ethan had here, though, is with how young the secondary is, Kenny will have to be the de facto leader in that room. Will there be a new lead dog in the secondary by the halfway mark of the season? Now, I think Kenny is still going to be the guy. He's had a fantastic training camp. He's showcased a lot, obviously, in that first preseason game. And look, it's Kenny. This is Pro Bowl Kenny. This is Kenny who just makes a lot of plays, a player that, the guys gravitate towards. So I think it's going to be Kenny this whole season. But I think Julian Blackmon could be up there as well. Julian Blackmon had a fantastic year a season ago. I think he's a guy who just gets things done. He's a playmaker. I think he's all over the place. And if you can turn more of those flashes into more consistency, then yeah, I think Julian Blackmon could be that top guy this year for sure. So yeah, I wouldn't count out Julian Blackmon whatsoever, taking a step and hopefully being a Pro Bowl caliber guy, but just being, a very consistently good player out there in the secondary. Another question here from @HitchRoute asks, in your opinion, what are your thoughts on the cornerbacks? Should we sign a vet or should we just roll with what we have? This has obviously been a burning question for a long time. And look, when it comes to the safety room, I would like to bring in just some vets to secure the backups there with safety, because I just don't think they have the communication or the reliability at safety depth. I'm fine with them being fairly young at the cornerback position. I think there's going to be some growing pains, obviously, but this is not a team that I really particularly thought being like a Super Bowl contender this year or anything like that. So I do think there is some value in getting snaps on the field for a Juju Brents, getting snaps for a Jalen Jones, and seeing what these guys can do. I would have been more comfortable with a third corner, maybe signing just like a reliable third corner, like when like a Rock Ya-Sin was out there, get him in the building just so you have another guy you can trust. But from where we're at right now, I think I'm fine with the two young guys starting, and then hopefully like a Baker Jr. can be a little bit better with his tackling, or Dallas Flowers can trust his Achilles a little bit more, and maybe they can solidify that room. But at this point, we're kind of where we're at when it comes to the cornerback room. It's going to be Jalen Jones. It's going to be Juju Brents. Kenny's going to be Kenny. We're going to see what happens. So I think, my confidence isn't super high by any means in this cornerback room, but I understand going young at corner. Again, I would have gone a little bit bigger at safety, but I understand going young at corner going into this year and just seeing what you have in those young kids. Another question here from Hoof Talk Podcast, or @Hoof Talk Pod. If you were Ballard, how would you look at the backup swing tackle situation? If he is the better swing tackle, would you switch him from left tackle to right tackle like Freeland last year? I think that's talking about Gonsalves. So would you have Gonsalves be the swing tackle that plays both left and right tackle? Or would you have one guy stay at one spot and one guy stay at the other? That's a really interesting question, because I think personally for me, the ideal situation is have one guy work exclusively at left tackle and one guy work exclusively at right tackle. But if Gonsalves is looking much better than Blake Freeland, which he did in that first preseason game, I would prefer just to have Gonsalves be that backup swing. And I think that's the way the Colts typically do it, is they like to have one guy be that pure swing behind the two starters. So we'll see. I don't love doing it like that with offensive linemen, just because you're constantly switching their footsteps and constantly switching their entire process back and forth. And I think it did kind of hurt Freeland a little bit last year. But if Gonsalves is that much better than what Freeland looked like last week, then you kind of have to go with Gonsalves as the main switch backup, the main swing backup behind the two starters. So that's the way I'm leaning right now, is probably have Gonsalves just be the swing guy and then Freeland be the fourth tackle. But personally, if they were both up to snuff, I would say Freeland stay at left tackle and Gonsalves be the right tackle. I think that would be a really good rotation to have if an injury were to happen. But that's obviously speaking of just a perfect world right there. One final question. This one's just about podcasting in general. So, it's kind of about the Colts, but not too much. Our guy @Keyblade asked, what advice would you give to someone who seeks a heavily coveted Colts journalist podcast role, who wants to get into this for fun and turn it into something serious? How do you script? How do you avoid rambling and stay on topic? As you guys know, you guys are big fans of Locked On Colts. If you're listening this far in the podcast, we do struggle with rambling quite a bit. We struggle with staying on script. We're not too bad at it, but I do want to shout out Locked On for giving us a lot of the tools to be successful here. They give us a lot of graphics. They give us, number marks in our show that we have to hit and stay on topic. And we have, timing that we have to keep the show under to keep it a part of the brand. So that really helps with us. In terms of how do we script, Jake and I are polar opposites here. Jake will put entire sentences in the notes, and I just put one word, and I'm like, oh, cool, I have to talk about Jason Bean. Let me go talk about Jason Bean. And I'll just put Bean in the notes, where Jake will write out everything he needs to say about Jason Bean. So my biggest advice is find someone that you connect with well, find someone that you work with well, like me and Jake, and share the load, share the workload, and really just, build that chemistry and build that vibe. You guys can let us know in the comment section what you think about me and Jake's vibe, but I think we do a fun job on this show and really enjoy what we do. And you guys, I hope, can tell that we're genuinely friends on this show. I think that's the biggest part right there. But about turning it from something fun into something serious, just record, man. Just have fun with it. Do your recording, learn SEO, and have a blast with it. So if you're still listening at this late in the show here, Keyblade, that's my biggest advice to you right there. Hopefully you can make it happen and roll with it there on your own show. I'd love to listen when you get your show up and running. But thank you guys for making this episode today your first listen today and every day, because that's what you guys are to Locked On Colts. Now, for your second listen, go listen to Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insight into the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this offseason. And guys, we will be back with you tomorrow night after the Colts and Cardinals preseason game at like 1 a.m. So make sure, if you guys don't already, you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, or at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. We're also on TikTok and on Instagram. Jake runs those accounts. So if you want to see us TikTok dancing, really get that follower account, those follower counts up on those two platforms. Also subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We love you guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here after the game tomorrow night.